DevOps is an outcome. It's not a
Yeah.
tool chain. It's not the CI/CD platform that you've just implemented, because by and large, it doesn't matter what CI/CD platform you pick if your processes are crap or non-existent.
This podcast is hosted by Cortex.io. We help organizations continuously improve their operational maturity and reduce developer friction so that the whole organization operates as one. Check out the link in the description to see how we've helped our customers cut their MTTR in half, double their deploy frequency, and save thousands of engineering hours with golden paths and the right guardrails. Thanks for listening to Brain Trust, a podcast for engineering leaders by engineering leaders. Welcome to the Brain Trust podcast. I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex. We help engineering organizations create a culture of reliability and make sure that they can move fast without increasing the number of incidents. Today, I have on Matt from Merge Ready. Great to have you on.
Hi, Ganesh. Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm Matt Bailey. I am a DevOps consultant and founder of Merge Ready, a DevOps community and YouTube channel.
Very excited to have you on. Before we started recording, we were talking about your kind of unique experience in this field. You have seen, quote unquote, the underbelly of the beast for a lot of organizations, having been in this consulting capacity and having helped so many organizations with their DevOps transformations. I would love to start there maybe and talk a little bit about, what you've seen and what good looks like and what bad looks like. So what makes an enterprise successful in their DevOps transformation, and what is the common failure modes that you see?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been working for the past few years, primarily in large regulated organizations in finance, in healthcare, even government projects as well. And although they're different industries, they face and you see the same patterns and problems. A lot of what I see is that they are trying to implement DevOps. And what they're really doing is implementing a singular tool with some theater around it, and not looking at the kind of flow and incentives there are for engineers and engineering teams to deliver value. So it's the same across all of these different industries, depending on the organization. But in particular, in these organizations, compliance, it's not an option. It's not optional, I should say. But it doesn't have to be the brakes on your software development lifecycle. It can work in tandem with your software development lifecycle, and it can make things much, much better. So that's my take on the underbelly as an overview.
I love that. And I think, what you call out is a lot of organizations, some tools, specific tools come to mind, but they roll out a new platform as part of their DevOps transformation. But I always like to think about it as like, if you're transforming from, excuse my language, from shit to shit, like it's not really a transformation. You're just doing it in a slightly different way. And I think the whole point of a transformation is that you're trying to unlock some new way of working, a new capability. And like, it could be, hey, because of the way we're working, we're only able to deploy once a month. And by undergoing a series of changes to our tooling, our culture, our way of life, if you will, we can go from deploying once a month to many times a day. And like, that's a real transformation. And I think that's maybe missing from a lot of DevOps transformations.
Absolutely it is. And you touched upon it there, but I like to say that, DevOps is an outcome. It's not a tool chain. It's not the CI/CD platform that you've just implemented. Because by and large, it doesn't matter what CI/CD platform you pick if your processes are crap or non-existent. So yeah, you really have to make sure that you're putting that effort in to drive the culture of DevOps, to really embrace that as an outcome, which a lot of people don't do. And you have an ecosystem where there's a lot of build it yourself, build versus buy. A lot of these larger organizations tend to see themselves as having a much larger software engineering team, therefore they'll build versus buy. But they still treat their platform teams as kind of second-class citizens. So they're the platforms that are either, whether they've built them or they're managing something else, they won't treat them as products, when the platform team very much should be treated as a product, and managed in the same way, because you're trying to deliver value. And that's a common pitfall, is that these teams become a ticket queue. It's just another gate in the way of innovation and improving that culture. So if you treat platform as a product, the adoption of that platform will come naturally.
Because you're actually driving towards some sort of value, like you're iterating it towards something that people actually care about. You said driving towards that outcome, driving towards that culture of DevOps. What does that mean? Like, what is a DevOps culture? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and one that I've tried to answer on many different occasions. It boils down to breaking down barriers within an organization to enable your software development lifecycle from writing code to production is seen as seamless and not perceived as an effort or filled with gates. We often talk about gates within CI/CD, security gates and all that kind of stuff, when it should feel more like, you're sailing down a nice river, and you may slow down a bit sometimes, but it's a flow, not like a canal with locks and gates and that kind of thing. I think it's hard to know when you have achieved DevOps. It's such a broad term, but the way I would like to measure it is, and it's difficult with these larger organizations, is basically measuring your engineering team's happiness. How happy are they within their role? What does the developer experience look like? Whether that is software engineers, platform engineers, DevOps engineers, SREs, whatever it may be. So, yeah, I don't know how you measure that outside of the. I prefer the happiness survey, right, as opposed to necessarily things like Dora and looking at metrics. But obviously, that kind of stuff is key for stakeholders as well, to see that you are improving as you go.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like a state of Zen. Here's kind of a tangential question, but I'm sure one that listeners are thinking. We hear a lot about platform engineering now. What is the difference between DevOps and platform engineering, if any?
It depends on the organization, and the definition of roles and teams obviously differs vastly, even within the same industries. And I've worked at two different banks, for example, that have had platform teams that do different things. One I would consider an SRE team who, manage the reliability and on call and that kind of thing. Whereas a DevOps team, I think the ideal, and this is, who am I to define these things, but generally speaking, a DevOps team is someone who generally works towards achieving that culture of breaking down barriers through automation, through providing self-service where possible. I see the platform team as almost an attachment to that, if not part of the same team, where it leans more on the software engineering side of things and is more to do with building out platforms internally or expanding on existing platforms. It's a tricky one, but I tend to think of a DevOps engineer as the evolution of what your infrastructure engineers were. And I think of our platform engineers as a similar persona, but focused more on software engineering to achieve the same goals.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess if I were to distill that, it's kind of your platform engineers are building the foundational capabilities that then DevOps teams can use to build the right automation for developers. Like the platform team might build out the capability to deploy something to Kubernetes in a standardized way. The DevOps team might use that to build and maintain a CI platform and build the right sort of guardrails and automation within your CI set of capabilities that make it easier for developers. So the DevOps is kind of like bridging the gap between the raw under the hood platform and like what the developers care about. Is that a reasonable summary of that?
I would say so, yeah. And I think, when it comes to hands-on keyboards, what you would see a DevOps team doing is providing templates in the form of infrastructure as code, providing templates in the form of CI/CD pipelines. That's not to say that the developers and software engineers themselves won't contribute to that, because I think internal contribution is key for a DevOps culture. But the accountability and responsibility lies with that DevOps team.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to the idea that we're talking about, kind of this Zen state, specifically in regulated industries. I come from a regulated industry as well in my previous job, and developing software in a highly regulated field is quite different. Like there is a different level of rigor, and compliance, like you said, is not optional. It is a thing that every feature, everything you ship has to kind of go through that process. Security is paramount. Like all those things are true. And so I guess is this idea of like this DevOps flow as a Zen state achievable in a regulated industry? Like if you have compliance as a requirement, people tend to think of compliance as a required bottleneck. Like it has to be a choke point. But is that true? Like does it have to be that way?
No, it doesn't. Compliance can be entirely, I don't want to be absolute, but it can be mostly automated, right? So we've got the tools out there now to enable us to bake in compliance into those templates that we discussed earlier, to add those security scanning tools, to the best of our ability, streamline approvals and manage change management in an automated way. The tools exist. I think most of these organizations, it's not a DevOps problem, it's decision latency and just not having that, the ability to decide upon what they are going to do. And if you've worked in a large organization, as you said, in a regulated environment where it can take 2 or 3 tickets in ServiceNow, it can take 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 approvals during those requests to just get a dev server. And in order to raise those tickets, you need to have registered your application in the software catalog and assigned an owner, and that required tickets as well. That's all automatable. There are some aspects of some regulatory standards that require manual approval and documented change management. But if you've got the resilience in place and you're not assigning that to a single person or a single manager, and you have contingencies if people aren't there or if there's delays, then I think it's entirely possible to fully automate and streamline these processes. That's not to say I've ever seen that in these large regulated organizations. I think everyone's at some different stage trying to reach that. In smaller organizations, it would be far easier to implement.
I love the phrase decision latency. I don't think I've heard that before. But decision latency implies to me there's like a human element, like somebody has to come in and make some sort of decision. But you say that this process can be automated. And so what does that actually look like in practice? Like, give an example of a workflow that maybe has historically had a human in the loop or humans in the loop with multiple layers of approvals that can be translated into something automatable. Because those two things sound like they're at odds, but you're saying that they're not.
Yeah, sure. I can't give specifics, but at one client I was with last year, an adjacent team to mine. So I was on what we would have discussed earlier as the DevOps team, and I was working with the platform team who were building this feature. The idea was that, and it goes back to ServiceNow and change management. The idea was that there were several stages during change management where releasing to production would stall completely, waiting for approvals. And if you've got more than one approval, you can guarantee that one of them isn't going to be done that day or that week. So the idea was to implement a standard change workflow. So this would be a change where we've seen this type of change before. We understand the risk of this change. We have approved changes in the past with these caveats. Therefore, we are able to, during the CI/CD pipeline, reference our change management system for previous changes and agreed standard changes, and therefore automatically approve your ServiceNow requirements, and automatically raise the initial change request as well. And this was using GitLab CI/CD. So the rollout, and it doesn't sound particularly encompassing, right? It sounds, yeah, that's fine. You know, maybe you get one pipeline a week or something like that. But we're talking an organization with over 15,000 software engineers. And we were delivering this in a way that it was completely reusable across all those different teams in the form of compliance frameworks. So integrating all these features with GitLab into this particular workflow, which saved countless days and dollars.
That's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like one of the requirements to automate this is having a shared definition of what standard is. Like, we all have to agree that these types of things are required, these types of things are standard, this is what good looks like, and then finding a way to codify that.
Yeah, and this comes down to DevOps. And I know that sounds silly, but traditionally when people think of DevOps, they think about breaking down that barrier between developers and operations. But that definition has expanded far beyond those two organizational units. Change management teams, they're approachable, they exist, you can message them, you can talk to them and have meetings with them to decide these things. You can talk about their pain points, talk about your pain points, and communicate what your desired outcome is and why, what the value is. They can communicate why they need all these things and the cost of not having these things. And together you can come to decisions on what can be automated and how you automate that. And I think that's just generally the culture of DevOps across any organizational units. I mean, we're seeing FinOps, you know, when it comes to cost management in the cloud and making sure that budgets are assigned correctly and that you manage your all your resources appropriately. DevOps is far more than just the software engineering part now.
Yeah, and I think it's true, even like you said earlier about platform engineering teams, like or just platform teams in general, having a product mindset. I think that's kind of what you're describing, is the product mindset is trying to figure out like what is the root problem that we're trying to solve here, and what are the blockers trying to, you know, that are preventing the user, the end user, whatever, from getting to that value. It sounds like, you know, maybe an approach like the 5 whys, if you've heard of it, is kind of what you're looking for here, which is like you continuously ask why until you get to the root cause. It's like, oh, we need an approval here, but why? Well, we're worried about the risk here. Okay, why? Like, you keep asking that, and eventually you get to like, okay, we had this incident 3 years ago that caused this particular thing, and so if we can prove that that class of issues is, you know, easy to guarantee it won't happen, then we can actually, you know, automate this whole chain of things. And so I think that 5 whys, I think it came from Toyota or something like that way back when, but yeah, it sounds like an approach like that is probably what you want if there are human in the loop processes you want to automate.
Yeah, and it is true that these compliance processes are some of the most difficult to unravel. I've seen at a healthcare company an IDAM process that caused a DevOps server request to take in excess of 30 days because of the various tools and teams that required to do approvals or just manual steps to create groups in Active Directory to do this, that, and the other. And my God, that diagram, yeah, spaghetti doesn't begin to describe. And you know, all the diagrams are wrong because the processes are far too complicated. So I think if your processes become that difficult to document, they're probably too complex or need consideration.
Yeah, I like that. There's a customer that we were working with, and I remember seeing one of those similar spaghetti diagrams, except it was just to create a repository, and I think they had 14 approval steps just to create a new repository. And I'm sure it's like anytime there's a process, there's a reason why. Like, it's not that people put process in for no reason. It's like in the historical context, the memory of the organization, and the memory of the organization is codified in these human processes. And you see that even at startups, like over time, the reason process bloats is something went wrong, or you know, there was a failure mode, and you're trying to prevent that failure mode with the process. And eventually over time that calcifies, and coming in and changing all that is actually quite difficult, because it's, at the end of the day, it's like deep rooted memory, or, you know, if you want to describe it differently, it's the trauma of the organization that they've like they're hiding behind a bunch of process. I think you have a very interesting perspective in the sense that you've gone into these regulated organizations, and I think regulated organizations are particularly challenging in this sense, because regulation is a very it's a very painful version of this trauma, or compliance for regulated things is a very painful version of this trauma that an organization has. And so those processes are put in place, have even more deep-rooted meaning to the organization. And so you go into these organizations and you convince them that, like, hey, the way you're doing things right now is not working, and you go and help them transform that. If a leader from a highly regulated organization is listening to this episode, what would you say is a place to start? Like, we're like, hey, yes, we are living in this world with calcified process and pain, and our developers are unhappy. How do I even start? Like, where would you start if you were there in their shoes?
That's a great question. I start small. You know, you pick a sample team or group, and maybe you identify by some metrics that you might have around risk, and pick that team as your pilot. You know, this is the biggest risk to our organization because there's been issues with things going into production or whatever it may be. Whatever it is, pick a small team and just start treating your compliance as controls as code, evidence everything, and try and be continuous with your compliance. So you're always audit ready, because you never know, right? If you're always audit ready, when that day comes, you're already there and you can hand it over. You can just hand over your evidence and whatever it may be. And audit season is a particular pain point, right? So gathering manual evidence kind of shuts down product teams across the board when they're getting Slack messages. Get me a screenshot of this. Can you screenshot the CI/CD logs?
Flashbacks.
Yeah. Can you add to the spreadsheet the different artifact names that were deployed to production and when they were deployed and when this incident happened? And it just halts everything. And the cost of that to an organization is in the tens, if not hundreds of millions, especially in these large regulated organizations, in financial organizations. So try and just codify everything. Make sure you've got your controls as code, your policies, your guardrails, your templates. So perhaps you're using a new platform and you think this platform has the ability to do all that. Migrate that team over to it. Migrate them, see how it goes. Get someone in to help you. There are specialists out there who, you know, like myself, who work on these giant digital transformations within these giant organizations. And we've had nothing but success after success. So implementing things like GitLab or Harness or whatever it may be as the core of that digital transformation, but then making sure we don't go into that tools are DevOps mindset, making sure we keep that mindset presence where DevOps is the culture. This tool is here to support us. And then you can implement those controls as code. You can implement everything as templates. It can all be reusable. And then you just migrate. Sounds simple, right? There is
Always sounds simple.
Yeah. There's no one size fits all for this kind of problem. I don't have a definitive answer of where to start, especially because I don't know the organization that you're operating in or what problems you have. But if you start to look at those problems and go back to your 5 whys, right, and follow some kind of a framework like that in order to find out the lowest hanging fruit and then pick it.
That's really important. I think 3 recent episodes have all mentioned start small as a solution for completely unrelated things, by the way. But I think that seems to be a very standard practice for success. And it's true. We know that in product management as well, as like, don't boil the ocean, start small, start iterative. Like, why would a DevOps transformation or a production readiness program or anything else be any different? Like, you want to start small, you want to prove the value and use that as like a beacon to the rest of the organization. Hey, look what we're able to accomplish. Like, why wouldn't we want more of this? But on that note, I think, I'm sure as somebody who goes into organizations and helps with this transformation, I'm sure you've seen this quite frequently. But the question I just asked earlier assumed that, somebody within the organization has already realized, hey, this is a problem, I want to do something about it, and they're trying to figure out where to start. I think a lot of organizations probably haven't even realized yet that there is a problem. And I'm sure you talk to these organizations and say like, hey, like, this is the thing, it's holding you back from X, it's holding you back from this DevOps outcome. If you are a rogue platform engineer or DevOps engineer or a leader within an organization who's trying to make this case internally, like, hey, the status quo is not great, like the status quo is holding us back. How would you tell that story? Like, how do you go and convince an organization that maybe hasn't realized that yet, that they should be even thinking about solving this problem in the first place?
It highlights my belief that DevOps, one of the core DevOps skills is communication and understanding stakeholder management. Now, a lot of people disagree, but where DevOps does work across a multitude of teams, it actually becomes incredibly important, especially if your role is to break down barriers and make things more successful within the organization. So when dealing with trying to surface pain points in order to influence change, you need to understand who you're talking to and what they perceive as value or what is valuable to them. And then you can start to try and record in some form of tangible data what those issues are. So one thing may be that your pipelines are incredibly slow because we only have one Jenkins server that's running everything or something like that. And then your stakeholder may be a engineering manager who has KPIs to do X amount of releases per week or something like that. It doesn't matter what it is, but you identify that what value, where they see value and where they get value, and then say, well, your KPIs are directly impacted by the speed of this pipeline, because if we were able to release quicker, we would be able to iterate over our features faster and deliver more value at the end of the sprint or whenever it may be. I'm not sure that that's a particularly good example, but the core of it is understand what value you need to provide, understand how the stakeholder that you are trying to explain this to, understand where they see value, and try and align the two, and how removing a particular pain point would improve both of your lives.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it kind of goes back to the same thing that we were talking about at the beginning, which is focusing on the outcome. And I think if you can tell that story with data or with anecdotes, like, and tying it to some sort of business outcome, I think is a way to get the organization to realize that there's a problem. It's like, hey, somebody up the chain is getting pressure to ship more, ship faster, ship better, whatever that is. And if you can tie the limitations in your process, in your systems to that outcome, then you can kind of get people to see those specific things, and you start small. You start with a small slice, a steel thread, or whatever you want to call that. And I think that is like evidence that you need for that transformation.
Yeah, and you also need that evidence to validate for yourself that you are making the correct assumption around something, which is important, that you're actually raising a legitimate concern. But within these organizations, I should also, we should caveat all of that with, you can't expect this change to come tomorrow. There are budgets, there is sign off, there is all sorts going on with various different stakeholders that you don't know within an organization. There is myriad of different things going on. So make sure everything is documented and ready to go as soon as the stakeholder's ready to pick it up and have a look.
Yeah. You were mentioning earlier that one of the most important skills in DevOps is stakeholder management. And I think people maybe think about it, especially in large organizations, they think of it as politics. Like you said, sign-offs. Sign-offs sometimes imply like, oh, there's a different stakeholder somewhere that is going to shoot down this idea for some reason, or there's somebody who's trying to get their claim to fame in some organization. They're trying to do their own thing. But if you're able to go back and figure out like, hey, what do they really care about? Like, what is the, you were talking about compliance as an example earlier. Hey, why do we have this process? Why does it matter? And if you're able to go and do that with other stakeholders, the whole point of stakeholder management is trying to find wins for the rest of the organization as well. That makes it possible for you to accomplish what you want as well. So it's not, I think thinking about it as politics is sometimes, especially in these large organizations, is the wrong way to think about it. They're individuals with their own aspirations, with their own goals, with their own pressures, with their own stressors, ambitions, whatever that might be. And you want to figure out, okay, how do we make this a win that everybody can showcase? And starting small is one way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. The perception of politics you need to be careful with, because that really just means people's interests that you don't yet know or understand. And that could be, oh, I want this tool because it's better and it will be faster. But your manager's saying, oh, well, we can't afford that because we don't have the budget. But they are trying to get the budget for another engineer who will just add to that bottleneck. So if you try and understand what's going on, if you can, get that sort of information, then you can use that to create yourself a more full picture of everything that's going on, and therefore be able to present a better value proposition to why you should be doing something.
I'm sure all the listeners have one thing on their mind, and it's always right now, it's AI. And I'm sure that comes up in your conversations as well. The advent of coding assistants and LLMs in every part of the stack today. Does that change any of this? Does that change how you think about compliance or DevOps or these outcomes that we've been talking about?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it changes the outcomes. It just changes how we get there. I think there's going to be some really interesting changes in the world of compliance in software engineering with the advent of AI agents. For example, I've already seen a tool called Cosley, which I've spoken about on my channel in the past, who they really embrace the evidence and continuous compliance. And I think what they're aiming to do with AI in their platform is have auditors be able to ask their product in plain English about particular things and to just to present you the evidence that's needed. So you will have an auditor just talking to a product as opposed to all these developers, for example. So that's one really cool thing about AI and audit times. I think we understand the guardrails required in order to use AI safely within software engineering now. I think that is propagating around teams. I think having Copilot or whatever it may be assist you in your day-to-day work is becoming more of a norm. And the stigma that was around that, I think, is dissipating when we know we have these guardrails in place to protect us and protect our reputation and our product. I think infrastructure as code is going to change quite drastically as we see AI agents improve and be trusted more. I think the way that drift and infrastructure drift is handled is going to shift. I think we're going to embrace drift far more than we ever did. I have a very controversial take that, in fact, we will be heading back towards ClickOps in the AWS console and provisioning servers, and then, it's codified automatically. And there's some cool products out there already looking at this kind of mindset where just embrace the mess. AI can codify it. It's all there. It's all following the guardrails that we need. I think it's going to be an interesting time. And I've tried to predict year on year what AI is going to do and bring and how fast it's going to do it. And got it wrong every time. So AI is ahead of me usually. So all I can say is I'm excited to see what the truth of it is and how that does play out. And I really hope that it just makes developers' lives easier, because at the end of the day, I'm a DevOps engineer. That's my goal.
Be nimble, be ready to adapt, and at the end of the day, focus on the outcome. And whether it's AI or current tooling or something else, I think you'll always have the right mindset. And I think that's kind of what matters in the end. Matt, it was great to have you on. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom. You've seen a lot. You've helped so many organizations with what I believe is one of the hardest transformations to do. And so we're really honored to have you and your learnings shared on the podcast today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.